Hi, it's Fiona Kane here, and welcome to episode 6 of the Wellness Connection podcast. Now, today I'm going to be talking to you about language around food. The language we use around food is really, really important, especially if you're having issues around food. If you're having no issues around food and you're happy and you're healthy, great. But if you're having some of these issues, which are very, very common issues around food, then it is really important to notice the language you use around food, whether that is a language in your head or whether that is a language that you use when you're talking to other people about it. Is really important to recognize that language you're using can really be affecting your outcomes. So, I will give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. First, I would say if you ever think about when we go out to eat with friends, and this is a really big generalization. I'm talking about how men and women are. I know it's a generalization. I get that. However, it's quite true in a lot of cases anyway. What happens is you go out for lunch with a group of men, and the men, what do the men do when they order their food? They just say, Yep, I'll have a steak sandwich, thanks. I'll have a burger and chips, whatever it is. They just put in their order and they order what they want, right? Simple as that, doesn't get thought about, talked about, whatever, except for how's your burger, how's whatever. That's the biggest conversation that most men will have around this topic. However, the women in the group or women in a group together, when they're ordering their food, they will say things like, I've been really good, so that means I can have the dessert, whatever it is. Or I've been really bad, so I don't think I'll have the dessert today. Or I'm on this diet, or I'm on that diet, or I have to have this, or I'm supposed to have that. They use lots of kind of judgment language and emotional language around food. And it's almost like they're getting permission to choose whatever food they want. So as long as the group accepts their whatever their penance is, or whatever their excuse is, or whatever their justification, like they're justifying why I'm choosing this food. So I'm going to justify to you why I'm choosing it and get your permission to eat it, right? Which is kind of weird when you think about it, that we have to somehow get justification from the group that it is okay for us to choose whatever the food is on the menu. So that is a real thing that women do a lot. I don't think men do it so much. Maybe it's changing, but that's my experience. And when you think about it, that's really messed up. What you decide to eat, what you choose, that's your business. Choose what you like. Yes, you should be thinking, or should's the wrong word. I will talk about that word in a moment. So I've just caught myself in it, right? But yes, of course, be thinking about your health and be thinking about your overall health and be thinking about whether or not that food is a good choice for you. Absolutely. I've got no problem with that. My argument isn't around that. But it's more that you have to justify it to everybody else. You choose what is right for you at that time and you just enjoy it, whatever it is. But there's no need to explain to other people what you are doing. So, what I find though is that when we do the problem, one of the problems with engaging in conversations with other people as well. So besides the fact that you shouldn't have to justify to anyone what you just chose, that's your choice. If you're grown up, then you do what you like. You live with the consequences. Do what you like. But then the next level, or the next part of this is conversations around food, and this is another one that women do a lot of, men less so, but maybe not so much now. I'm not saying again, nothing's exact. There's always crossover with these things. But what I see a lot is, again, it's that conversation around food where someone might say, that this is all innocent, no one's meaning this in a bad way, but they might say, So, Karen, can you have this? Are you allowed to have this? Are you allowed to eat this? Are you allowed to? Right? That's really, really bad language. Now, even if, like, and quite often it might be in the case of, like, say, someone is celiac or someone is diabetic, or they're on, or they have diabetes, or they're on some specific type of dietary protocol. And there's a reason for it. So I get the reasoning behind it. But the are you allowed is very kind of, child. adult child thing that, you're not allowed to do a certain thing. And the truth is, as adults, you're allowed to do what you like around food. You just live with the consequences, right? So, it could be, do you eat this? That's fine. And then the person with celiac disease or the person with diabetes or whatever it is might say, no, or I do sometimes, but I've had enough today, or whatever it is, that's fine. But are you allowed to have that thing? And it's a real thing when people are on diets. So it's, no, no, because I'm on keto, I'm on this, I'm on that. No, I'm not allowed to. It's not whether or not you're allowed to, it's what you choose. So I have no argument about what diet you're choosing to do or not. That's up to you. It's the language around it. You're a grown up. You're allowed to eat what you like. It comes down to, can you afford it? And is it good for you, or is it something that you choose to eat? And does it fit with whatever your values are, or whatever your goals are, or whatever you're doing? But that is up to you. You can choose what you like. Again, you just live with the consequences. But are you allowed? That's very, the problem is when we use language like that, it might seem silly, but we in the West in particular, we do have a lot of emotional stuff around food and a lot of emotional attachment to food, and we've been taught lots of kind of good bad things around food. So the problem is when you say, are you allowed? That's actually invoking that kind of, you're the child and you've got to do as you're told thing. And when you invoke the child in you around food, that's when you're going to get the rebel. That's when you're going to get the ones, well, I can have whatever I like. I'm going to eat the whole lot, right? So just be aware that when we're using this kind of adult child language, that's what happens is we actually invoke that rebel in us. So rather than kind of just going, oh, yeah, of course I'm allowed to, I just choose not to, or I choose to, whatever the situation is, as kind of, no, I'm not allowed. So it's just kind of adding to that sort of that authority thing, that an authority is telling you what you can and can't do. And generally speaking, as human beings, we don't respond too well. Well, certainly in the West and certainly around food, we don't respond really, really well to being told what to do. So just be aware that language like that, again, it is the more language that's more likely to get you to make choices that aren't so good for you because you're rebelling against something. And yes, of course, you're allowed. It's not about whether or not you're allowed, it's about whether or not it's a good idea for you and whether or not that's your choice. That's very different to, are you allowed? So just be aware of that language and using that kind of language. The other thing, too, is if people are talking to you about your diet, uh, uh, the problem again is most women and some men these days are on different stages of their diet journey. So they've either just found the greatest, best diet in the whole world and it's working really well for them, and they're evangelists. They want everybody to convert to that sort of diet religion that they've found. Or maybe they've gone off their diet and they're feeling really bad about themselves. They're feeling really ashamed somehow that they don't have any self control, or some kind of shame, blame, or judgment on themselves around their diet. They might be sort of thinking about what the next diet's going to be, or they might have just found some other protocol that they think is great because their best friend just did it. Whatever it is, but most women are at some. It's a cycle. It's a diet cycle, and maybe not most, but many women are on this diet cycle somewhere. So they're either feeling bad about themselves, they're feeling good about themselves, they're somewhere in the middle. And usually, when we're on a certain sort of diet protocol, we kind of are very much of kind of that religion, and that's the thing, and that's the right thing, and that's the thing we're doing. And the problem is when you do start discussing that in a group of people, is that you're going to bring up everyone's personal stuff. So what's going to happen is you might get negative comments, or you might get judgment, or they might say certain things that might be true for them, but not true for you. Or you just might be activating the part of them that feels ashamed about what they're doing. And it just could end up being a negative conversation all around. Because the other thing, too, is that when you found the diet and it's the magic diet and it's the one that's perfect and it's working really well for you, if someone comes along and says, well, I found this other diet that's really good, it's even better than the one you're on, that's quite threatening actually, because now you found the answer. You have found the absolute answer. And then someone comes along and tells you there might be a different answer. that can be very stressful and very threatening. So, again, those conversations can be quite fraught. So, just be aware of that. It's usually best not to have too many conversations along this line. It's coming from a nutritionist. Don't have too many conversations along this line. The other thing too is to just, what I do with my clients when I'm working with people on this sort of thing, what we talk about is we actually just talk about being on a food adventure. Because I work with a lot of people who have a lot of different health conditions, or they might have food sensitivities, or there's a whole bunch of reasons why we might be doing certain diets, or we might be doing certain restrictions in their diet and trying certain things out. But what we do is we do a food adventure. We don't. It's not a restrictive diet, and it's not a punishment diet. It's just a food adventure. So when you're having a food adventure and you're just learning what nourishes you, and you're learning what works well for you and what supports your health, that is very different to you have to eat this and you're on a diet and you're restricted and you're not allowed to do, it's very different language. So just be aware that the language is quite different. The other thing that I wanted to bring up before I said the should, and I picked myself up on that. That's another thing that's important to know in the power of language, is that we often do use these pressure words like should. So we say, I should do this thing, or I must do this thing, or I have to do this thing, or I need to do this thing. And when we use the language, often, especially things like should is somebody else. Should is somebody else's opinion. It's what society thinks, or what some relative of yours thinks, or what a work colleague or whoever it is. But it's somebody else's opinion. It's not yours. Should is very much, it's been implanted in your brain from somewhere out there. So when we're saying should, where it's not even about us, you've got to reassess what when you say should, is that really something internally that you feel is right for you? Or is it just somebody else's story about what they think you should do? Instead, what we should do is use freedom language, right? Freedom language offers possibility and choice, whereas pressure language is you should do this thing, right? So, freedom language is I can, or I could, or I get to, or I will, or I choose to. And one example would be, you know, I have to pick up the kids from school. Well, that's technically true because someone has to pick up the kids from school. But you could also say, I get to pick up the kids from school. Two very different things. And there'll be one day in your life that you'll miss it. You might not miss it right now, but one day it will be gone and they'll be moved away and your situation would have changed and you will miss it. So you get to pick up the kids from school. Yes, of course, technically you have to. However, just the language you use makes a big difference. And if you think about of that in a way in regards to your diet, it's not I have to do a gluten-free diet or whatever it is. It's I get to, and I choose to, and I can. Isn't that great? Because I do all those things and I get better. So it's about just using language that gives you choice, language that gives you freedom, and language that just makes it purely about this is what I'm choosing to do, this is what I want to do, as opposed to that kind of story that comes from someone else about what you're supposed to do or what you should do. So just be really aware that you're using language that is a choice for you. I'm choosing to do this thing, because that is really, really powerful. The other thing is we do talk about, and I kind of hinted at it before when I was talking about going out with your girlfriends for lunch or whatever, good or bad. I've been good or I've been bad. Again, you're a grown up. It's a very childish thing. I've been good or I've been bad, right? So if you bring up that good and bad thing, it brings up those parts of you that are rebellious, right? Because the thought is that, if I have to be good, then I don't get to have any fun. And if I get to be bad, I get to have fun, but then I'm bad. So that's shameful. So it just brings up, again, all this emotional stuff, all this turmoil that is really pointless and useless and not helpful. So it's not about I've been good or bad. It's either, look, I've made choices that probably don't work so well for me. I've made choices that poor choices, or I chose to do that. I really enjoyed it, but it's not something I'll do all the time because it doesn't work for me. That's very different to I've been bad. I just made different choices. That's what I did, right? So it's not bad, good, whatever. It's just I made these choices. And when you make better choices, again, it's I'm making choices to nourish myself, or I eat this way because I feel good when I do it, or I'm making this choice because it's what I want to do and it's what I like to do, right? Which is very different to I'm being good. Because the problem with the good and bad thing, the perception is that I've got to try really hard to be good. I've got to try so hard because naturally I'm really bad, but I've got to try really, really hard to be good. And that is a battle. And whenever you turn food and nutrition and diet and all that kind of thing into a battle, you can't win the battle, right? So don't make it a battle. You're not good or bad. You're just human and you make choices, right? And some of those choices benefit you and some of them are less benefiting to you and you live with the consequences. So again, you make choices, you do what's right for you, but you're not good or bad. It's just choose what's going to work for you, right? And that takes me to the next bit of language, and it's a similar sort of thing. But we talk about being on or off track or on or off the wagon. I hear this language a lot. So let's have a look at it. So if we're on or off, that implies track for starters. That implies it's a track. Is there a track? Is there really a track, or is a track just something we made up in our head? Right? You're on or off track. You just made a choice. Whatever choice you made a different choice. You made a choice that's beneficial, a choice that's not, or that is whatever. Yeah, a choice, yeah, beneficial or not. But that's just a choice you made, right? It's not a track. There's no track, right? So all you need to do is make a different choice. Your next choice. The next time you open your mouth to eat something or drink something, or the next time you choose to say something, or the next time you choose whether or not you're going to go for a walk or go to the gym or sit on your backside, they're choices, right? And it's only ever about your next choice. So, whatever choice you made 5 minutes ago, an hour ago, this morning, you can make a different choice later in the day or later. So, it's only ever about your next choice, right? There's no track. You're not on track or off track because the other thing is too that again when we use this language, first of all, we're making up an imaginary track. Where is the track? I'd like to see what this track is. I have never seen the track. Secondly, the perception is that if you're on or off the track, that somehow it's like that there's just this psychological thing, right? That when you're on track, you're great, everything's going great, feeling really good, I'm on track. But when you fall off the track, somehow that's a long way and it's really hard to get back onto the track. Apparently, there's not even a track. And even if there was, it's only ever about the next choice. But in our mind, it's, oh, I've got to get back on track. It's this really big deal to get back on track. No, it's only about your next choice. There's no big track to try and get back onto. You don't have to worry. It just doesn't exist. It's only ever about your next choice. And that actually feeds into some of the stuff I've been talking about in previous podcasts where I've been talking about perfection. Because perfection loves this on track, off track thing. Because perfection, excuse me, I'm just going to have a drink, losing my voice a bit. Perfection loves the on or off track because with perfection, you're either all in or you're all out. There's nothing in between, right? And that's, I think, where a lot of this on or off track stuff comes from. It comes from this need to have some sort of perfection. And we already know, and I'll probably say it every podcast because it's so important, but there's no such thing as perfection. You're not going to get it. You're a human being living a human life. It's not going to happen. So the problem is if you can only practice self-care or if you can only look after yourself or you can only eat well or you can only exercise or whatever the things are that are beneficial to your health. If you can only do those things when you're on track and when you're being perfect and when you've got it all sorted, and the rest of the time you can't do any of it because it's too hard because you're off some imaginary track, you're never going to do anything and you're going to spend your whole life waving between the two, right? Which is what so many of us do. And when we're waving between the two, what happens is when we fall off, we feel ashamed and we start thinking, I have no self control. There's something wrong with me. I have no discipline and I must be somehow bad or wrong or whatever it is. And then we have all this shame around the fact that we've fallen off track. There wasn't a track to start with. You just made maybe what was a poor choice for you. You might have made several poor choices for you. However, your next choice can be a different one. And magically, you're back on that track again because there isn't a track to start with, right? So just be really, really aware that so much of the language that we choose around food actually limits us so much because when we're being good or bad, or when we're being wrong or right, or when we're off track or on track, so we're on the wagon or off the wagon, means we all in or all out, right? That none of that is helpful. The truth is, you're managing your life, you're managing your food, and you're managing your health, and all of those things, and you're doing all of them at the same time. You've got lots of balls juggling in the air all at the same time. You just do the best you can, and sometimes we make better choices than others. Sometimes we don't. Like it is what it is. That's fine. It just is how it's fine, right? You're human, right? You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to be perfect all the time. You don't have to be on track. Just make better choice next time. Simple as that. The other thing before I wind up today, and I'm just checking through my notes because there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. So the other thing to talk about too is, and it's something that I think I'll pick myself up on this from something I said earlier as well. The other thing in regards to language is, and maybe it's something I can talk about more in future, but it's actually separating yourself from the action. So what I mean by that is we often refer to ourselves as, say, like, I'm a food addict, or I'm a something something in regards to food. And I actually made the mistake of using it before. I think I, I said diabetic or celiac, and I know that they are accurate descriptions of health issues. The problem is that it's like making the person the disease, or it's making the person the problem. So, you can be a person who has celiac disease, you can be a person who has diabetes, you can be a person who has some issues around food, right? But that's very different to saying, I am a food addict, or I am a binge eater, or whatever the language is. The problem with that is there's no separation between you and your behavior, or you and your disease, whatever the subject is you're talking about. But I'm moving on to more behavior now. So just be in mind that I'm talking about behavior now. I've stopped talking about the disease stuff. When you are the behavior, there's no way you can change that, because if it's who you are, you can't change that, right? So the problem with calling ourselves that, and that's actually one issue. I know that 12-step programs and things like that can be really amazing, and people have really great results, and I really admire that, and well done to people who do that, and it has its place. My only concern, and I've seen this too with there's so there's a group called, I think they're called Overeaters Anonymous, and again, they're calling you an overeater, right? Can you see straight away there you're identifying yourself as, like, you're saying, I'm an overeater, as opposed to sometimes I overeat, or I have an issue that relates to overeating, or overeating is something that I do sometimes. But it's very different to I am an overeater, because one is who you are, which is very hard or impossible to change. The other is a behavior, right? We can learn to change behaviors. We can improve behaviors. We can change things that we do. But changing who you are is much harder. So the problem is when we identify ourselves as a problem, it limits us quite a bit, and it makes it very difficult for us to change the problem. So just remember to put a space in between yourself and the problem. So you may overeat sometimes, or you may emotionally eat sometimes, or stress eat, or whatever it is that you do, whatever your food behavior is. But it's not who you are, it's something that you do. It's a behavior that you have sometimes. Very, very different. So I encourage you to really think about the language that you're using around food. Just notice what you're saying, not in a judgmental way, in just a very, very curious way. Just notice the language you use. And when you notice you're using this sort of language and you notice yourself justifying your choices to other people or saying that you can't do something or you have to do something or you should do something, or when you notice yourself labeling yourself in a way where you're saying, I am this, as opposed to, I have an issue with this or I have a problem that relates to this. Notice the language you're using because that language can be very much, it can be a big part of whether or not you're able to stop something or change something or not. And it's really, really important. One other one in relation to food, too, that's just worth pointing out to you is the other one is the way we talk about whether or not we like or eat certain foods in regards to, okay, so say someone, I've seen this so many times. I'll have a client come to me and they say, oh, no, I don't eat vegetables, right? I hate vegetables. Okay, fine. And the last time they ate vegetables, they were 6 years old, they ate vegetables and they hated them, or they ate broccoli or whatever they had and they hated it. And they've never had it since. And now they're 60. That is ridiculous. Like there are some things that we just genuinely don't like. But the truth is, when you're a child, you have way more taste buds and things taste more powerful and sometimes really awful at that age. And they taste great when you're 20 or when you're 25 or when you're 30. So, first of all, I would say just be open to retrying things further down the track because you'll find that many things you will enjoy later and some things you just won't because that's fine. The issue is that when we talk about food, we talk about it in a very closed way. So we say, I don't eat vegetables. I hate vegetables or I hate the thing, right? The problem with that language is it's absolute door shut. That's it, over. And when we talk in that way, our brain just perceives that it's done. So it never ever entertains the idea again, right? Because you don't or can't do that thing. As opposed to, I haven't liked vegetables in the past, or when I last tried broccoli, I didn't like it, right? Because they are still true, but they leave some wiggle room, right? There is still possibility. So when you make something don't, can't, won't, right? That's very door closed, can't happen, not going to happen. But when you leave some wiggle room in there, you're still saying a true statement. In the past, I haven't liked vegetables, or I've never had, no one's ever served vegetables to me in a way that I've enjoyed, or whatever the language is. You can still tell the truth. I'm not telling you to start saying, I love vegetables. If you don't, you don't. However, if you say it in a really closed way, your brain won't ever entertain the idea that it could be possible that you could ever like a vegetable again in your life. And the truth is, most people will like at least one vegetable if they try them. Uh, and what happens is you limit yourself, you limit your, and this can be in many parts of life, not just around food, but it is a real thing with food. And beware of doing it with children too, because what happens is your child, 3 years old, they don't like peas. And then what you do every time dinner is served, you say, don't give peas to Johnny because Johnny doesn't like peas. Johnny doesn't eat peas. You go out to barbecue, Johnny doesn't eat peas. You say that for that child's whole childhood, right? So they become the person who doesn't eat peas rather than, well, he didn't like peas before. Let's try it again, right? And, he still might not like them when he's 50. But he might have started eating them by then because it was something he didn't like at the time. And then later on, he tried it and he liked it, right? So we close down possibility when we use this really, really strong language around food. So, anyway, I will leave it there. I hope that that was useful. Just be really aware of your language around food and how much it can really affect your food experience or limit your mind's ability for you to make a change a habit, or open yourself up to bigger possibilities sometime in the future. Anyway, I hope you have a great week and I'll talk to you again next week. Thanks for joining me today. See ya.